Bridges, with your host, Donnie Miller, connecting our community with information about issues and opportunities.
Good Sunday morning and welcome to Bridges. I'm so happy to have you here this morning. I promise you today's story will make it difficult for you to leave your seat for the next 27 minutes. We're talking this morning to the amazing Marjorie Curry, who is the director of Marjorie A. Curry and Associates. We are talking about this journey that you have taken from being an abused child to being the author of the book, More Than Meets the Eye. Welcome this morning. I want you to know I think that you are incredibly brave.
Thank
I
you.
do. As I read this book, I read this book in one sitting, by the way. Even though it's very, very raw and it's a difficult book to read, it's also one that just locks you into your seat and doesn't allow you to move. So knowing that, I need to ask you, what compelled you, what motivated you to be so open about all of the difficulties, and difficulties is not nearly a strong enough word, about the horrific events that you suffered growing up?
I believe that my story is not just for me, but for others. So that was the motivation behind writing the book, to share my story, to help youth in foster care to do better, to excel, and to realize that there is hope. And when I speak with young people and I look them in the eye and I say 4 simple words, I've been there before. And when you say those words to those young children, and you see hope re-enter their bodies. And so that was the method behind writing the book, to give young people in foster care hope, to offer them hope.
The mission of your organization, and you have your own organization that helps you in your efforts to give young people hope, has a particular mission. Will you tell folks what it is?
Yes, that mission is to provide training across the country, ultimately across the world, to service providers in order to help them to deal with the needs of youth in foster care, to look at our approaches as a system of how we deal with youth in foster care, and to take a realistic stance and look to see, is what we're doing really helping youth, and to be dedicated to the point that we understand that sometimes doing business as usual can do more harm than good. And so to take that look at what we're doing as a service provider.
Okay. Your book talks about growing up as a child, growing up through your childhood, being taken away from your mom, you and your siblings, and moving into foster care, and then moving out of foster care to become the first college graduate in your family, yay for you,
Yes.
and someone who also went on to get a master's in public education, I do believe.
Public administration.
Public administration. Yes. Good for you.
Thank
Good
you.
for you. Congratulations. Your book, though, talks about events that I think most people have a difficulty even thinking exist for kids. You talked about being raped by your cousin. You talked about being molested in foster care, about stealing food, about seeing violence. Your uncle almost killed
Yes.
your sister
Yes.
in front of you.
Yes.
Who were you back then? How did you get through that back then? Who were you at 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9?
I believe that I was the Marjorie that was preparing to be in this position here. I believe that a lot of that was part of God's plan for me to experience that, so that again I can reach back and say that there is hope because I experienced this. And it began to build a resiliency in me. And a lot of times that conversation is, can resiliency be born or is it nurtured? And I believe that I was created with a purpose, and because of that purpose, that resiliency was in me. But then there was still this innate desire, you know, within me, in knowing that God was with me along the way. And yes, it was hard. And
but a lot of this happened to you before you actually connected with your spirit, at least in the book that seems
Yes.
to have happened.
Yes.
So what really got you through those younger years before you were able to connect with your faith?
Right.
And your faith is, it says very clearly in this wonderful book that your faith is really the vehicle that drove you through
Right.
all of this. What got you through when you were
think
younger?
It was when I was younger. My grandmother used to always take us to church, so I had a concept of who God was, and it wasn't until I was older that I was able to connect the two. So him being there along the step along the way, just being there was good enough. And a lot of it was motivation, internal motivation to prove everybody wrong, to prove those wrong who said that I would never be anybody, to prove those wrong who said I would just be a drug addict and prostitute like my mother, to just simply prove people wrong. That was my internal motivation to make it.
Your dedication in the book to your mom was really pretty amazing.
Yes.
Has she read it?
No, she hasn't read it yet, and I'm hoping that it doesn't bring her to tears when she actually does read it. The dedication to her is about how much I really do love her, even though the things I experienced that I went through, and because I do believe it was a divine purpose for me to go through those things, I don't hold any guilt or resentment toward her, and I love her earnestly because I believe that it was all a part of the plan and part of the process.
You are a very generous and mature young lady. I want to read to folks just a paragraph from your book, just to kind of set the stage a little bit. And this paragraph comes from the section where you speak about the social worker coming in and saying that the house needed to be brought to standards
Yes.
before you could stay there. Okay, do we have that, Brian? I'm going to read it. There you go. There was no running water in our home. The carpet was so filthy that the bottom of our feet looked like we had been walking in mud. The dogs would pee inside the house, and my mother's friends would often use the carpet as an ashtray. There were no beds or other furniture in the house because Uncle Ray and my mother sold everything to buy drugs. You remember that time very clearly.
Yes, very vivid. Yes.
Very clearly. How did that separate you from other kids? How did you feel about living?
It did. You were afraid to bring anyone home. You didn't want anyone to know your conditions. When you left the house, you put a smile on, you put on the best clothes you did so no one knew what was going on in the house. So it did ruin relationships with friends. And also, there were many times that I went to school with a dirty uniform on and students would laugh at me and talk about me and call me names. And then that's when I became the fighter to become on the defense and to ultimately put people on the offense so that I wouldn't have the teasing anymore. And so it was a very hard place to be as a child because we understand that sometimes kids can be cruel and they may not say things that are the nicest.
The nicest things,
yes.
absolutely. You describe yourself as a street fighter.
Yes.
In the book.
Yes.
You know, how tall are you? Like 2'4", and you weigh like 60 pounds, but you were the street fighter in the
Yes.
street fighter. Learned to do that to just keep folks back.
Yes, and I was the more of the dirty fighter and pick on the biggest kids to set an example so that anyone else would not even try. And again, it was a coping mechanism to keep kids from picking on me and becoming the victim, because you had to learn either you were the victim or the perpetrator. You had to pick a side. You had to choose which one you're going to be.
Yeah, you learned pretty early though to shield yourself and protect yourself, as I recall from the book. There's a passage in the book where you talk about carrying a locker, combination lock,
Yes.
with you just in case.
Just in case. Yes.
Just in case.
The combination like went along with the steel-toe boots.
The-
Just in case.
Just in case.
Just in case.
You actually got into some significant trouble for using that lock
Yes.
on a young lady. When I read your book, I got a strong sense of a lot of anger that you repressed going through your childhood.
Yes. Yes, and I wouldn't say I oppressed it. I believe that it was more, I acted out in anger. My ultimate response to everything was an angry response. Even if it was someone correcting me in love, my response to that was in anger. It was an outrage because that was the only emotion I had grew up witnessing in my home. That was the only emotion that I was comfortable with. And to love someone and to be close to someone was difficult.
Very
So
difficult.
what do you do? You act out in anger to push them away because everybody I had loved at that point had been taken away from me or walked away from me.
Or everybody you trusted had
Yes.
disappointed you.
Yes.
There was the piece in the book about, the name doesn't come to me quickly right now, but the foster parents whose the gentleman would come in under the pretense of putting Vicks Vapor Rub
Yes.
on your chest,
Yes.
and which led to some.
Right, the molestation.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
I'm having a hard time getting
Yes.
it out. Which led to that particular instance of
Yes.
molestation.
Yes.
So who let you down, Marjorie?
I can say that there are several people who let me down, many to count. But the ones that stand out the most are the ones who didn't let me down. The people like my late foster mom, Dr. Helen L. Brown, who stood in my corner even when I acted out in anger because that was the only emotion that I had. She stood in my corner. So those are the people that I like to put the emphasis on rather than those who let me down.
When you're talking, thank you, and that's a great way to phrase all of this, I think. But when we're talking about changing the system, which I really want to spend more time on later this morning, when you're talking about changing the system as a person who went through the system and had so many hurdles to climb. It's important also to say that you were the surrogate mother for your siblings,
Yes.
a lot of them, and you were just a child yourself
Yes.
at that point. So when you're talking about changing the system, where do you think the system needs to change? What pieces of that system were most ineffective in your journey?
I think that one thing that we can do as a system is simply to pose a question to the young people. What do you need? How can I help you? Nowhere along the process was that question presented to me. And if someone had presented that question to me, then they would have understood or heard that, yes, I'm being abused in this foster home. This is not the best place for me. This foster parent's not allowing me to eat. This foster parent's locking me out of the house. If someone had posed those questions to me, then I would have been able to give that information. So as a system, we have to make sure that we're receiving the feedback from youth in foster care. And to adequately to address the needs of youth in foster care, we have to have their feedback and have their voice at the table. And as a community, we have to see this as our problem, not just the agency's problem. It's a school problem, it's a juvenile justice problem, it's a community problem. It's, to go even further than that, it's a faith-based community's problem as well. We have to, as a community, see this as our problem, that we want to address this. Everybody plays a role in it, and I can pinpoint people in every one of those systems who's played a role in my life in some way. Some were not the best, but they still played a role in my life in those agencies.
But there's a very expensive system out there right now that is designed to help kids like you were, like
Yes.
that young child that you were, overcome the issues that they're finding with their parents. I remember you talking about your mom being very tearful when she handed you over, but I also got the sense that she thought at that moment that where you were going, although she loved you, was better than what she could do for you at that moment. So the system, though, was one that made it difficult for you, more difficult in many ways than it was at home for you.
Yes, I would agree that a lot of things, once I came into foster care, it had got worse. And I wouldn't say that my mother felt like I was going to a better situation. I felt like she felt as if there was no hope, that there was no chance of her beating the agency. And so she kind of just wiped her hands.
So she felt she felt helpless
Yes.
in the situation
Yes.
with the agency.
Yes, that's my honest opinion of how that situation went.
Okay. We have to go away for a minute, unfortunately. We'll be right back. And I want to talk a little bit more about your perceptions as to how the system could be changed and some lessons that you might want to leave, some thoughts you might want to leave with other young folks who've been through what you've been through, okay?
Yes.
All right. You'll stay with me?
Yes.
All right. We'll be right back in just a moment.